Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. Sorry for the delay, but I lost internet here briefly. But I'm back now, and that's what's good. So, now we're going to talk about my favorite subject. Many of you have heard me speak about this before, and it's important. And it relates to the question of whether the experience of inner freedom or spiritual liberation is a choice or not. Do we have a choice if we want to be free or not? And I think you all know that I'm quite convinced that there is that we do have a choice. But a lot of people feel, and I used to feel myself, that freedom was a sought spiritual freedom was a sought for experience of higher emotions that had nothing to do with choice. It was just a spontaneous gift from God that we may or may not have earned. And that the only real spiritual freedom was that kind that was only purely a spontaneous gift from the absolute principle. And anything else was just came from the workings of the mind and ego. That's what I used to think, and a lot of people still feel that way. But I've been thinking about this for almost 40 years, and I've come to some very different conclusions about how this all works. But I'm a firm believer in the fact that choice is a big part of being what it means to be free in the long run. And as many of you are well aware, many people have brief glimpses of samadhi, of higher states of consciousness, of spiritual freedom, of enlightenment. But it seems to stick for very few people. Many people taste it or seem to get an experience of a visitation from the absolute and experience the exhilarating thrill of inner freedom, of spiritual freedom, but don't manage to hold on to it for very long. And too many of us, too many spiritual seekers live in the context of dwelling upon memories of short-lived experiences of higher consciousness, longing for those experiences to return again, and suffering a feeling of loss and disillusionment. And I think this is the case for many people who seek for enlightenment. Now, what's very interesting is if we say, well, the experience of awakened awareness, the experience of enlightened consciousness, the experience of inner freedom is not dependent merely upon this higher principle or this God principle. It maybe has everything to do with the position we choose to take in relationship to our experience. What I like about that is it puts the responsibility for enlightenment on our own shoulders. Because enlightenment is a strange word, you know. Are you enlightened? It's a very difficult question to ask, and it's a very difficult question to answer. Since I'm in the enlightenment business, this is what I do. It's a question I have to deal with all the time. But the question kind of inspires a kind of question: is he enlightened? Is she enlightened? Are they always dwelling in the bliss of God consciousness? Are they permanently free from suffering? Have they realized a state of perfection? Have they utterly transcended all human imperfection in the context of this state of illumination? Or are they still at times merely human? And I've come to the conclusion that enlightenment is a tricky business. And for most truly illuminated individuals who are able to sustain their awakening for a period of years and decades and lifetimes, I think in the end it's more to do with the choice they've made in relationship to their own experience rather than living in a state of awakened spontaneity all the time. And how this works is very interesting. Usually when we seek, this was true for me, I'm sure it's true for most of you, that when we're in the process of being seekers, we've read about God consciousness, we've read about enlightenment, we've read about the experiences of the great realizers. They all seem to be describing the same thing, so it must be real. So we hear about these glorious, magnificent, intoxicating, ecstatic experiences these great realizers have had. And what they're describing sounds so amazing, so absolutely life-changing, that we want to have a taste of it ourselves. I certainly did. And then we usually do all the things we need to do to seek for these kinds of experiences. And if we stick to our guns, if we don't give up, or if we stick to it, we usually, sooner or later, have an amazing experience, which confirms everything we've read about. But as I was saying earlier, it usually doesn't stick around that long. I've had so many people with me on retreats over the years, in the midst of the intensity of the retreat setting, I had an awakening to enlightened awareness in a very powerful way. And we're in an ecstatic state of samadhi for days on end. And they were utterly convinced that they were in a state of permanent illumination, permanent enlightenment. And in all those cases, it wasn't true because although they were temporarily enlightened, these experiences temporarily enlightened us. Most of them fell back to earth within a matter of hours, days, weeks, or months. And the returning back to earth after flying so high is often quite painful and quite frustrating and confusing. So, the way I like to teach, and many maybe heard me say these things before, I feel that these experiences that are bestowed upon us, if we're lucky enough to have them, give us glimpses into the ultimate nature of reality. The spiritual experience is like a glimpse. It's like it's an experience of clear perception about the ultimate nature of reality. And if it's a powerful experience, it's quite convincing. And the question I'd like to ask people often is, how many of these kinds of experiences do we need to be convinced that enlightenment is real? Is once enough? Or is twice enough? Or do we need 20 repetitions or 100 repetitions? Because these experiences we go from experience of duality to non-duality, to relative reality, to absolute reality. And when you make the flip from duality to non-duality, to relative reality, to absolute reality, it's quite a shock because the world looks very different. You look different, your mind looks different, your experience of life looks different, everything looks different. It's like suddenly you're on the mountaintop and you can see everything so clearly. And one of the important qualities of these kinds of experiences is when we make the flip from relative reality to absolute reality, is the certainty, is the sense of the certainty that this is what I'm experiencing is more real, more authentic, more true, more genuine than anything else I've ever experienced in my life. This is more real compared to this level of reality. Everything I've ever experienced in my life seems unreal and ephemeral, meaningless, superficial. So a true seeker, of course, wants to live in alignment with the state of deeper perception that we awaken to when we awaken to absolute reality. So the question I ask people, as I'm asking all of you also tonight as we're together, how many of these kinds of glimpses, when we take the leap from relative reality to absolute reality, from duality to non-duality, how many of those kind of flips do we need to experience to become convinced what the truth is? Because many people have these experiences more than once, but they live in a state of doubt. Did that really happen? Was it really true? Did I imagine the whole thing? And you can understand if that's only happened to us once, you can understand why it would be plausible or understandable that we identify with our ego's concerns. Was it real? Maybe I just imagined the whole thing. But if this has happened to you 10 times and you're still doubting it, you still need more convincing. What is it going to take? How many of these kinds of experiences do we actually need to be absolutely convinced that enlightenment is real, that absolute reality is more valid than relative reality? Absolute reality is more real than relative reality. Because it's that simple flip when we gain certainty. It's an experience of certainty. A truly realized, genuinely realized spiritual master is someone who has certainty about the ultimate nature of the real. They always know the difference between relative reality and absolute reality, and their certainty is coming from their conviction about the ultimate nature of that which is ultimately real, absolutely real. That's what gives them the source. That's what the source of their charisma and their spiritual self-confidence comes from, that absolute certainty. And that certainty is intoxicating and very powerful. It's the source of spiritual power. But it's rare. It's rare to meet an individual who has absolute certainty about the difference between relative reality and absolute reality and relative reality, and it's very rare to find someone who's very certain about that distinction, who's not crazy. Because there are a lot of people who are very certain about these things, but they can also be quite deluded. And as I'm sure you're all well aware, the spiritual marketplace is pregnant with many kinds of spiritual delusions of all kinds, including in the forms of different kinds of teachers and teachings. But to find spiritual certainty is certainty about the difference between relative reality and absolute reality, duality and non-duality, and someone who's definitely not crazy, someone who actually feels more sane than most people. This is what we're looking for. And so to follow along with this inquiry, how many of these kinds of moments do we need to have for us to achieve a state of inner certainty ourselves? And that's the question. Is the presence of a very intense experience of spiritual feelings, is our certainty dependent upon the presence of particular feelings? Is absolute reality absolutely real just because we feel, only when we feel it? I'll repeat that. Is absolute reality absolutely real only when we feel it? Or when we don't seem to be able to feel it, is absolute reality still absolutely real? This kind of thing. So the way I think about this, the way I try to teach, is that I try and help people to have enough of these glimpses to be able to develop a little bit of certainty. God is real, God exists. Absolute reality is supreme. I know it because I've experienced it enough times to be absolutely certain that it is more real, more substantial than relative reality. And it's that certainty, the emergence of this kind of certainty, that becomes the foundation of the ground of our liberation, our potential for liberation. And certainty, of course, is a dangerous thing, because everybody's afraid of being wrong. But a genuine realizer, a genuine master, is absolutely certain about the difference between relative reality and absolute reality, duality and non-duality, and they don't care what anybody thinks, because they know in their heart of hearts what's more real. And what I call their spiritual self-confidence comes from that certainty. And then people might mock them or laugh at them or humiliate them, or whatever they're trying to do, it doesn't make any difference. So, so if you think about what I'm saying, it's kind of interesting. If you say, well, maybe the issue here in terms of my aspiration for enlightenment, my aspiration to awaken to enlightened awareness, is maybe not dependent upon the presence of a particular feeling state necessarily, but it's dependent upon, do I have certainty? Because spiritual self-confidence comes from certainty. So do I have absolute certainty in the absolute nature of the absolute? Or am I still plagued by doubt? And the goal, at least in the way that my guru taught me, the goal is to become doubtless. That being doubtless and being certain is the same thing. Now, we have to remember that, of course, to be very informed by postmodern thinking and informed by integral thinking, it's considered to be foolish to be absolutely certain of anything. Absolute certainty is considered to be a dangerous thing. It's a sign of kind of pathological narcissism or some other kind of mental illness, which may be true in a lot of circumstances, but it's not true in relationship to spiritual realization, especially if it's real. And what's so extraordinary about spiritual realization, awakening to enlightened awareness, is that the object here that we're speaking about is awareness. It's the nature of awareness itself. So what we're speaking about is not an object. Non-duality is not an object that can be seen. It's the nature. It's the nature of reality. It's the ultimate nature of reality itself. It's not an object that can be seen by a subject. It's a dimension of reality that exists at all places, at all times, under all circumstances. Everywhere, it exists everywhere and nowhere. But it cannot be made into a mind object. And now we're getting more into the dimension of intuitive knowing. The kind of knowing that comes from transcending the mind toward the mind stream. Enlightened awareness emerges when we transcend the mind stream, and then we awaken to this intuitive capacity for deeper knowing, deeper feeling, deeper gnosis. It's not rational, it's transrational. And transrational certainty, transrational knowing is what I'm speaking about. So once again, how many glimpses of absolute non-duality do we have to experience to come upon the kind of certainty, immovable certainty that I'm speaking about? Now, I think it's a matter of karma also. Karma, which in this case would be spiritual readiness. Because most people aren't ready to go this deep off the for a long time. Many lifetimes, maybe. This the way reality works in this dimension is very different than ordinary time and space. So it's your capacity for certainty of what you can know, but that which you can't see. Certainty for that which you can know through intuition, with your awakened intuition, but that which you can't see, smell, taste, or touch. It's very dicey because the world we live in all the time is very rationally oriented, materialistically constructed, collectively. So it's the certainty here, and just try to think as I'm speaking about your own capacity for this kind of certainty, because I'm quite convinced that my capacity for long-term, strong, steady, indestructible enlightenment is dependent upon your capacity, our capacity for absolute certainty. And keep in mind that the ego is terrified of this kind of certainty. This kind of certainty scares the ego to death. The ego knows it will be the death of it. Will be it means it's death. So in the way that I try and share these ways of thinking about enlightenment, I try and make the case that I'm trying to make right now, that the revelation of absolute reality, or the absolute nature of absolute reality, exists in another dimension beyond time. But the goodness, truth, and beauty that is revealed to us through that kind of revelation transcends any other kind of human experience. Like getting a kiss from God. It's the most beautiful, intoxicating, inherently and instantaneously liberating kind of knowing we can experience, which changes absolutely everything. It really does, it really does, it really does. So I've felt for a long time that if we if we're lucky enough to experience the grace of these kind of transcendental moments, do we have the necessary humility, take responsibility for what we've seen? Do we have the humility and the earnestness to take responsibility for what we've seen? Because each time you have a glimpse of absolute reality, you're seeing into the ultimate nature of all things, which is a rare gift. It's a rare glimpse into truth. It's like seeing the ultimate secret that exists beyond time. And a weak-minded person won't have the courage to take responsibility for those kind of moments. They'll be too scared of the implications. Whereas a strong person will feel spiritually inspired and spiritually compelled to take responsibility for those kind of moments. And I think the only way most of us can make genuine, deep, meaningful, purposeful spiritual progress is by cultivating the soul strength necessary to take responsibility for these kinds of moments. One step at a time, one step at a time, one step at a time. This is how we can become truly enlightened men and women. It takes courage, it takes guts, it takes inner resolution and cognitive sacrifice. You have to be willing to give up a lot of falsehoods in yourself and in the world that you've come from, the cultural context you've emerged from. There's so much that we see as being false that we have to give up. And the more falsehoods you give up in terms of what you've learned and how you've been conditioned, the more you have to become a different kind of person, a liberated soul in a complex world. It's a big deal. It's a very big deal. Most people aren't looking for liberation anyway. They just want to be happy. Just want to be happy. Liberation is much deeper than that, much more serious. So do you feel, I know I do you feel a need within yourself to be responsible for these glimpses of God consciousness? Do they mean something, mean that which is so important that you feel you need to be responsible for what they mean? Now, what does it mean to be responsible? It means that if you imagine, let's say you imagine someone in your life, whatever your vision of enlightenment is, whoever you think is truly the real McCoy, choose whoever you want. It's up to you. But whoever you believe, earnestly believe, and respect as being truly illuminated in a significant and meaningful way, all the things you'd expect from them on a human level is what you will begin to expect from yourself. Because now your karmic trail that you are leaving has to be an expression of not only your broken humanity, but now your illuminated soul, your illuminated heart. You have to be responsible for what does that look like. And it looks like whatever you think it should look like. You're free to make your own choices here. But whatever you think it should look like is what you should look like. You should make the effort to look like. And that means the minute we have to start making an effort to live up to our own values, 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 to our own spiritual convictions, then the game of life gets a lot more serious. It becomes a lot more demanding. It becomes more profound. And what's beautiful about this point I'm trying to make here is just to state, to repeat the obvious. These are your values, and not values that have been imposed upon you from anybody from outside yourself. This is what you already think. So if you think you believe that an enlightened person should behave like A, X, Y, or Z, then you want to begin to live up to those ideals yourself. Now, I realized this very quickly because I became a teacher, a guru, very quickly overnight in 1986. Everybody was looking at me like I was the Messiah in those days. I'm not kidding. People saw me as a Messiah-like figure in all my imperfection. So I was very aware that what I did and the way I did things was being watched, and people were judging me according to their own ideals and beliefs about what enlightenment looked like. Now, in the way that I think about this, I don't think these experiences are ends in themselves. These glimpses of absolute reality, I don't think that's not an end in itself. The way that I think about it, I think these glimpses are means to an end. These are moments of grace that bestow upon us the spiritual vision, the ultimate vision, the absolute vision of reality. I believe so. We will be spiritually inspired to live the Dharma as ourselves in this crazy world. I believe these moments are, to repeat, not ends in themselves. Not, oh, this is it, this is the whole thing. Say no. This is a brief glimpse about the ultimate nature of reality, which is meant to inspire you, to give you the spiritual strength to live a better life, to live a more meaningful life, a more purposeful life, to live the Dharma transparently, authentically, radically, and completely, in and through your own imperfect body, mind, and soul. It's almost like you could say that these are moments of spiritual seduction when the absolute spirit seduces us through her undeniable glory to submit to her will and her grace, so to speak. And that's when we realize we're not living this life for our ego anymore. We're not living this life to have, get, and become for ourselves. We're living this life for a much bigger reason, which we now discovered when we awakened to absolute reality. Oh, this is not my life. I see this is a gift. This life is not meant for me. It's not meant for me to work out my problems, really to untie my karmic knots. It's about the whole universe. My life is about the whole universe. It's not just about me. I don't count. I don't really matter. But the evolution of the interior of the universe really does matter. And if I'm awake, I'll be in a very, very precious position to be able to contribute to the evolution of the interior of the universe. I'll be in a position to do something meaningful, purposeful, important, that has inherent meaning and inherent purpose. This is the death of the small self and the awakening to the biggest perspective that there is, cosmic consciousness. So, to repeat the question I asked a little while ago, how many of these kinds of experiences do we need to become absolutely convinced about the absolute nature of absolute reality? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50. At which point do we say, I've got it, thank you, this is enough? Because the reason we don't want to say, thank you, God, I got it, is because we don't want to have to be responsible from that moment on to the absolute. Maybe we might wake up with a headache. Or maybe our husband or wife said something rude to us last night, and we might be struggling with kind of unresolved trauma or something. We might not feel so good the next day. God, I was so inspired last night. I don't feel inspired right now. I got to keep God waiting. Because the reason we don't want to say yes to it is because then that means our time is up. It means time's up. We can no longer be a jerk, or we can no longer be an ignorant fool anymore. That's the point. We consciously give up the right to be an ignorant, selfish fool because of our experience of illumination. So because of our experience of illumination, we've given up the right to be an ignorant fool, which is our liberation. You will discover it. But most people are so identified with their ego's feelings that they're scared to death of giving up the right to be a jerk. Because the ego feels, look, I'm sorry, Andrew, I've had a hard time. I'm still struggling. And I can't give up the opportunity. I can't give up the right to be a jerk yet. I need a little bit more opportunity. So the ego's afraid of giving up the right to be a fool, an ignorant fool. So when we say, yes, now I know, now I'm convinced, now I know everything I need to know for the rest of time, the rest of eternity. I've seen what I need to see. I know what I need to know. And then the idea that then everybody is forever. That's the game we're playing here. This is when it gets very real. Forever, which means I don't need to have another experience like this. If it comes, I'll be happy that it comes. I'll welcome it. I will appreciate it and be very grateful. But my liberation is no longer dependent upon any more of these experiences because now I know what I need to know, and I'm willing to stand. And I'm willing to stand in all my imperfection to be true to what I've realized here, no matter what it takes. And so you see, this is where this whole issue of choice becomes involved, because at a certain point, if you become spiritually convinced about the ultimate nature of the absolute, this is where your capacity to live the life of a stoic in many ways comes online. This is when you begin to fight the good fight and take responsibility for your own crazy mind, crazy emotions, and insanity. We make the decision we're going to become sane, illuminated, beautiful people. That's why we're here in this world, to become beautiful people. The only way we know what God looks like is because we know how we look. So, to repeat, the ego doesn't like to cut off. It doesn't like to give up the opportunity to be self-indulgent and lost and confused. Say, no, I'm willing to give up my excuse for being lost and confused. It doesn't mean I won't be lost and confused on occasion, but I'm giving up the right to let myself be lost and confused. It means no matter how bad it gets, and it will get bad again, you believe me. Life is tough. I no longer have a right to be completely lost anymore. It means I always have to know who I am and where I am, what I'm doing here, what this is all about. And I'm going to be responsible for that and become an exemplar of what that means in my life and the way that I live it. And I don't need another experience to give me that confidence. I have the confidence already. Thank you very much. Not my will be done, but thy will be done. Thank you. Then we'll start to live with an attitude of gratitude. An attitude of gratitude where we experience humility, gratitude, sense of great gravitas. Life is not a game. Life is not a joke. Life is not an accident. Don't feel an obligation, the spiritual obligation. I'm speaking about is what can make beautiful, dignified people out of us. Without a sense of obligation, there's no way for dignity to reveal itself. But when we feel a spiritual obligation to be the best version of ourselves we can be, not for ourselves, but for the sake of life itself, for the sake of the evolutionary process, that's when something's really happening. That's when our spiritual life comes alive with meaning and significance. Sometimes it's hard to be true to everything that I'm saying. That's why it's so valuable, because it is hard. So it's hard to be an authentic person. It's hard to be real. It's hard to live with courage. It's hard not to be a victim. It's hard to be true. All these things are hard, but so what? That's the message that we get when we glimpse the absolute nature of reality. the absolute nature of absolute reality. This is what we find ourselves compelled to do, compelled to be true. And the more we're willing to make whatever effort is necessary to be true, our spiritual conviction just gets stronger. Our spiritual self-confidence gets stronger because the more we live the spiritual life in earnest, the more we become convinced of our own authenticity. When you become convinced of your own authenticity, assuming you're not deluded and crazy, which is a big assumption, but assuming with a small chance that you're not deluded and you're not crazy, there's always a small chance that's true. If you are, then you start to become the real thing. You're going to start to become an authentic article. And it's because of your own choice to be true. Your own choice to be true. So at the beginning, it's not a choice because we don't know anything about all this. At the beginning, it's not a choice. But after we've had enough experience, enough of these deeper experiences, we realize, oh my God, it is a choice, and it always has been a choice. I just didn't know it. Now that I've discovered it is a choice, I'm scared to death, but I know it's the only right thing there is to do in the end. In the end, it's the only right thing there is to do. Anything else is a diversion and just a waste of time. Anything else is just a diversion and a waste of time. At a certain point, when we become spiritually mature, either we do it or we don't. The ego always has a lot of excuses about why it's not ready yet. And believe me, your ego will always scream, but I need more time. And the ego might need more time, but the point is the ego's needs are not the most important thing anymore. So these higher needs become more important than the ego's needs. Say, I'm sorry, but time's up. Time's up, baby. So try and wrestle with these ideas I'm bringing up because they're important. They can change your life. They change mine. But it's rare for people to have the courage to really do this for real. I mean, if you're going to do it for real, it means the way you're thinking about it is forever. Not, I'll try this for a while, see how it feels. Would you like to get married? Say, well, I don't know you that well yet. Let's date for a while. I'll see if I like you in a few weeks. And the beautiful thing, the beautiful part of what's beautiful about this way of looking at this process is that it puts the power of the outcome in our own hands. We get to be largely responsible for the outcome. It's a beautiful thing. And it's not just a matter of being lucky or unlucky. It's a matter of how much integrity, spiritual integrity, do we really have? Because remember, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So the more we know, the more you learn about the way the ego works, and the more you learn about the absolute nature of absolute reality, you start to realize that a big part of you doesn't want to do this. The most important part of you, your soul, your true self, your authentic self, wants to do this. But there's so many parts of you that don't want to do it. And at a certain point, you have to get to the point where you completely disregard the part of yourself that doesn't want to do this, and only give attention to the part of you that does. That's when you're a true renunciate. The freedom is a choice. But I just retracing some of the things I said. Of course, I want to be fair about this. So just say at the beginning, it's not true. We don't have a choice at the beginning because we don't know what the choice is all about. We don't know the territory. But as we learn about the territory, we start to learn, oh, I see. This is serious business. I've been screwing around for 20 years, never really taking it seriously. When am I going to take it seriously? So I think I made my point. And finally, I finished my talk, but I want to just add this one piece, which I've been trying to add as I've been speaking lately, is try and keep in mind something that's very hard to remember, which is that the terrain or the territory that begins to reveal itself when we awaken to non-duality is very mysterious because it's transcendental territory. It's mind transcending territory. So when you're in that territory, when your soul is then ventured into that territory, it feels very familiar and very easy and obvious. But most people can't remember what they knew when they were awake to enlightened awareness. Most people forget within seconds. Once they descend from those lofty heights, they forget everything that they knew. And this doesn't matter. This could be people who have just learned about awakening. Just this is a new experience, or people who have been known about it for decades. Most people cannot hold on to that consciousness of gnosis. Most people forget about it. Within seconds after they've had the experience, they fall back to earth. They don't remember it. It's not available to them anymore. So this only works if you're actually in touch with the consciousness itself. You have to do anything and everything. You have to remain cognizant of the consciousness of gnosis in order to remain connected to actually what we're talking about here. Otherwise, it becomes very murky and very hard to remember. Why am I doing this? Why is this important? Oh, oh yeah, now I remember. And I find this one of the most scary and confusing parts of this whole process, especially being a teacher. I find it very confusing. So many people awaken in a dramatic way and they are thrilled about their awakening experience, and then they forget about it within seconds. It disappears. We have to create the conditions in which we have to all have to do what we need to do to create the most perfect conditions in which this mysterious secret of gnosis, spiritual gnosis, they'll stick around long, so stick around longer. Won't just vanish into thin air. You can only walk the path if you know what you're doing. You can only know what you're doing if you're in touch with the actual territory itself. This requires enormous concentration. I always used to, you all probably know that the original Buddha used to, he took all of his monks on a 3-month retreat every winter. And I always was blown away when I said, can you imagine what it would be like to living with the Buddha himself, the enlightened one? To just being physically near such a being would probably be instantaneously enlightening anyway. All you have to do is sit near him and sit in the field of his grace to wake up. But apparently not. Apparently they did this strict, very disciplined hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of meditation for 3 months, all day long, all day and all night, every year to tighten up their back so they remain connected with the absolute nature of the absolute. So and they were with the Buddha himself, that might give us some indication of what's required here. the enormous commitment and effort involved to stay away. But the good news is, everybody, that once you do make up your mind, once your karma falls into alignment with this absolute principle that I keep speaking about, once your own karmic karma falls into alignment with this absolute principle I'm speaking about, everything I'm describing becomes fairly easy. Not because it's necessarily emotionally easy all the time, but it's because you're not ambivalent about what you're doing anymore. You're not ambivalent about who you really are, what you're doing here. You're no longer ambivalent about the bottom line. Doesn't mean life won't be difficult or confusing, but it means you're not fundamentally ambivalent anymore, which is where all your spiritual strength and conviction comes from. I know who I am. I know why I'm here. I have no doubt. Very free. And you can get on and do what you need to do. And finally, if you can do what I'm trying to describe to all of you, you'll become enormously independent as a person. When you get this kind of self-confidence, this kind of spiritual self-confidence, and it awakens a kind of ferocious independence, which is very liberating. You won't be weak-minded anymore. So many people are weak-minded. Don't know what they think or why they think or what they think. It's important that we find a way to stand on our own 2 feet in our own souls, you know. So if you have any questions about anything I've said, I'll be happy to try and answer your question. And if not, that's okay too.
If you have questions, please write them in the chat window that you find at the bottom of your Zoom window, and I will read them out loud and then open your microphone. Yeah, I have a first question here, Andrew.
Okay.
From Promote. He is saying, "Hi, Andrew. I'm very happy to see you again, and it renews the joy that this beautiful connection has brought in my short journey with you. Related to your sharing today, it seems that we move into this becoming, coming from choiceless awareness of the absolute to focused clarity and integrity in each moment, free of the perceived shortcomings or challenges of the relative self. This leads to freedom, which is a clear choice. Is this the right understanding?" Another thing that strikes is the liberating self-confidence that comes about. And yet, if some small part seems to not want to accept this, how do we work with this?
How do you work with the part of yourself that doesn't want to do this? Huh?
Yes, Andrew.
You take responsibility for what you're doing. Yeah, we have to learn how to not to listen to the part of ourselves that doesn't want to do this. The part of you that wants to do it, and part of you that doesn't want to do it. At a certain point, whenever you're ready, you just have to stop listening to the part of us that doesn't want to do it. Because it's impossible to feel good all the time. Should we not do this because a small part of us doesn't want to do this? Huh? Once we realize what the stakes are and what we're actually doing, we just simply do what we need to do, and we don't listen to the part of ourselves that doesn't want to do it. We stop listening. The ego is like a big crybaby. The ego is always a big crybaby because it can't have things its way. It doesn't want to give up any. It doesn't want to give up its attachments, bad habits, addictions, victimization, small-mindedness, narcissism. It doesn't want to give it up. So we say, well, I'm going to do this whether you come with me or not. I don't really care. In my way of thinking, the only thing that matters is that we actually succeed in this. We succeed, we succeed, we succeed, we succeed. Part of the path is painful, and then struggling with the ego at times it can be very painful. We used to think the ego was our best friend, most intimate friend, and we discovered the ego is never our intimate friend. It's like saying goodbye to somebody we used to love. We realize the ego does not have our best interest at heart. It can be painful to part ways with. Well, part of ourselves we used to believe in, we don't believe in it anymore. And just because you stop believing in your ego doesn't mean your ego is going to give up. The ego only gives up when we stop listening to it. As long as you listen, the ego will be very alive, very powerful, very distracting. It's only when you stop listening to the ego it begins to fade out. It takes a lot of courage not to listen to it. It takes a lot of courage, a lot of spiritual discipline, a lot of self-knowledge and insight. You really know how to do it. It means no matter what your ego says, it doesn't matter. No matter what the ego says, it doesn't matter. Does that make sense?
Yes, Andrew. It's been a journey, even with the voices. Maybe they're amplified, and as I think I stay with the practice, it does tend to be not so amplified, but it's there. It's not, and
Very good.
so the
Very good.
question
That doesn't
was
matter.
coming.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You follow?
Yes.
If it doesn't matter now, it can not matter in the future also. But the minute we allow it to matter, we're thrown off the path of enlightenment to enlightenment. Path to enlightenment is very specific. It's all based upon ego transcendence. So the minute we allow our ego's complaints to matter, we're thrown off the path. We're thrown back to earth. This is why we have to be very discriminating. We have to be very dispassionate about this with ourselves. This is why Chogyam Trungpa used to have a statement. He called it CC. You ever heard of Chogyam Trungpa? He's a very famous American Tibetan Lama, very famous teacher. And he had a phrase called CCL, which meant couldn't care less. So we have to practice dispassion with our own ego, which is not an easy thing to do, but we have to learn how to be very dispassionate with our own ego, which means I don't care, The reason we don't care is because we found something so beautiful, so meaningful, so gorgeous, so purposeful, so life transforming that we don't want to waste any time on anything that's only relatively real anymore. We just want to stick with that which is absolutely real. That from the perspective of that which is absolutely real, that which is relatively real is just a big distraction. It won't feel like a distraction from the perspective of relative reality. But from the perspective of absolute reality, it will feel like a mere distraction. So we want to become grounded in the absolute position. If you're a real yogi, if you're a real aspirant for enlightenment, you become grounded in this absolute position. That which is relatively real is only relatively real. That which is absolutely real is absolutely real. Not the same thing. The problem is most of us live in a relationship to reality where most of our engagement with the mind and world is in the context of that which is relatively real. So we're not used to these relative absolute distinctions. We don't usually think about the way we live our life in the context of these absolute distinctions. But we have to learn how to do that. It takes patience, effort, patience and time, and practice. But it's all doable. That's why spiritual practice and the commitment for long-term success is so important. We have to be committed for the long term, otherwise it doesn't work. Your ego's only going to give up if you can convince your ego that you mean business and you're never going to back down. Then the ego will say, "Okay, you win. You're stronger than me. Thy will be done, not my will, but thy will be done." Because the ego sees it's not as powerful as you are. Now that's when you start awakening to enlightened awareness, right? So you become really spiritually powerful, spiritually empowered. That's when the certainty begins to emerge. I was speaking about at the beginning. But it's not easy. When it's easy, it's easy. When it's not easy, it's not easy. And most of the time, it's not easy. But just because it's hard, so what? Those things of greatest value in life usually are hard. You've all heard about the razor's edge. This is them describing the razor's edge.
Can I give you another question, Andrew?
Sure.
Thank you.
It's coming from Yvonne Di Gecco. She says, "Hi, Andrew. I have a lot of responsibility of raising 3 kids as a single mother and working multiple jobs to pay bills, etc. How can we attain a state of enlightenment when we have many obligations of responsibility to another human being? Is this all ego?"
No. You have to do the best you can within the complexity of your karmic circumstances. We all do. So if you are determined to liberate your soul in the context of embracing the huge responsibility of being a mother with 3 children, you can do it. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. It's probably very difficult, but you have to be very doubtless about your own certainty about aspiring for this kind of liberated consciousness. Because one of the signs of liberation, of spiritual liberation, is the always trying to be bigger than the challenge, always being spiritually and emotionally and intellectually bigger than the challenge you're facing. Even if a challenge you're facing can be practically, emotionally, and intellectually overwhelming. Because if you allow yourself to get overwhelmed by a challenge, you can be tempted to give up. But if you're very steady, you embrace a bit of stoicism, you won't allow any of the challenges you're facing to be bigger than your spiritual embrace of reality, which is always going to be bigger and more embracing of the totality of reality. So you have to always be Your spiritual aspiration always has to be bigger than whatever the relative challenges that you're facing in real life, which may be very real and very difficult. But don't allow the enormity of the challenges you're facing in relative reality ever appear to be bigger than the enormity of what you see when you awaken to absolute reality. But yes, what you're facing is an enormous challenge and very demanding. You can still do it if you really want to. Who says you can't? It might be harder for you because you have more responsibilities, but so what?
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
100%. Thank you.
So it requires a kind of stoicism. You know what that means?
Yes.
It means being tough. It's being tough-minded and big-hearted.
Right.
With yourself. Tough-minded and big-hearted with yourself. And your relative circumstances will change over time, and you eventually will have more time to devote to this, I'm sure. The main thing is that you stick with it now, even within the confines of the enormous responsibilities that you have. Don't turn away from it. Don't say, I can't do this now. You can also do this now to the best of your ability. The important thing is to stay connected. Stay connected. Always stay connected. Always stay connected. Always stay connected. Always put this first, even if it's just with your mind. Don't push away liberation. Don't push away absolute reality into the future. And then you'll be in good shape.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Sure.
The next question is from Ben, and he doesn't have a microphone or a video, so I will just read it. I have realized that most of my spiritual drive was determined by the desire to escape suffering and the resistance to certain thoughts, states, feelings, etc. I now find, having practiced for a long time to integrate and not resist my thoughts, feelings, and emotions, that I no longer really have a drive to become enlightened, as I no longer want to escape any state. There's no longing for one state over another. I have known blissful states. Should I push further to live in those permanently, or is the empty stability the true self?
Well, it depends on what you want. It depends on what you want. I've thought a lot about this kind of question that you're asking, and not everybody wants the same thing. Some people are more interested in a high level of emotional integration than they are in transcendental liberation. I remember when I was working with a very famous spiritual psychologist once. I was working on myself with him, and as I was observing him and observing myself, I started to notice that he was not very interested in transcendental liberation or enlightenment, but he was very much interested and invested in emotional integration. And he was very much aware of his emotional ups and downs from one moment to another, and was very focused upon very much being connected with his feelings in a very conscious way from moment to moment. And he was more interested in being connected with his feelings from moment to moment in a very conscious way than he was in being liberated from them. And then I realized whereas I've always been more interested in transcendental awareness and liberation more than emotional integration. Doesn't mean I don't think emotional integration is important, but it's not as important to me as liberation is. I realized that it was very interesting. We didn't both want the same thing. We actually didn't. We had different goals in terms of our development. So it's really up to you. What do you feel is more important to you? I'm in the category of a transcender, and I always have been. I don't apologize for it. I've been so absolutely touched so deeply by the revelation of transcendence that I've never gotten over it, and I still haven't gotten over it. I don't think I ever will. So we have to be true to our own soul's inclinations in relationship to this? What do you feel is the most important thing for you? What do you want more than anything else? Of course, all these things are of a piece in the end. It's all part of the same territory in speaking in a general way, but when we get more specific about it, it's not so simple. You have to be true to yourself here. So the kind of emotional integration that this therapist was practicing and was aspiring for, to me, from my vantage point, felt very emotionally suffocating and unbearable. Not because I was trying to avoid these things, but because I just wasn't interested in it. And I think he felt very strongly that people like me were, what's the phrase? Forgot the phrase. Spiritual bypass. No, spiritual bypasser. Guilty. But you have to remember, Ben, that to give myself some credit here, there are 5 fundamental principles in my teaching, the basic teaching principles, Dharma principles. And the third basic principle is, if you want to be free more than anything else, then you have to be willing to face everything and avoid nothing. If you want to be free more than anything else, you have to be willing to face everything and avoid nothing. So that's not something most people want to do. Most people want to face nothing and avoid everything. Does that help?
Ben is responding here saying, thank you. I thought I wanted enlightenment, but I'm not so sure now, or perhaps my idea of enlightenment is changing as I get closer to truth. That itself is quite blissful, but very subtly. I'm starting to feel subtlety is more valuable for me than the extremes.
Well, the main thing that's important is the truth, whatever the truth is. The truth, whatever the truth is.
And then there is a next question from Ananda.
Okay.
She is saying, it's hard for me to orient to this message without love being the driver. That enlightenment is not some achievement, but more of a surrender to finally, and if possible forever, be of true and full service in an ever-expanding way.
Beautiful. I'll sign up for that.
Woohoo! Yeah, different perspectives on the path. Yeah.
I'll drink to that. That sounds good for me.
This was the last question, Andrew.
Very good, very good, very good. Yeah, just the last thing I want before we end, the last thing I want to reiterate that I already said a couple of times is, please don't underestimate how subtle all this is and how difficult it is to remain conscious of all these different dimensions of our experience that I'm pointing out here. But I appreciate everybody's focused attention tonight. I really very grateful. And I look forward to seeing everybody as soon as possible. Much love to everybody. Thank you so much.